I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror, fixing my tie, getting ready to leave for my 75th birthday dinner. My family was already waiting. The car was outside. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. Just 4 words: call me. Do not sign. I called him immediately. I've worked with this man for over 30 years, and I had never heard his voice shake until that night. What he told me wasn't about business or money. It was about my own daughter. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about my life began to fall apart. I really appreciate you staying with me so far. Take a second to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It helps me remember I'm not alone in telling this story. And for clarity as we continue, some elements of this story are dramatized for educational and narrative reasons. Any resemblance to real people or situations is coincidental, but the lesson itself is absolutely true. I drove my vintage Jaguar to the Hamptons, to the sprawling estate that I had put the $2 million down payment on just 3 years ago. It was supposed to be Tiffany's dream home, a place for her and her husband Brad to build a life. Now it felt like a crime scene. Before I got out of the car, I reached into my glove compartment and took out a small, high-fidelity voice recorder. I slipped it into the breast pocket of my navy blazer. If they wanted to play games with reality, I would make sure I had the master tapes. Walking into that house was like walking onto a stage where everyone knew the script except me. Tiffany greeted me with a hug that felt too tight, too performative. "Happy birthday, Daddy," she squealed, kissing my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and nervous sweat. Brad, my son-in-law, was right behind her, holding a tumbler of scotch. He was a man who had failed at 3 different startups and was currently drowning in debt, though he tried to hide it behind leased luxury cars and custom suits. "Here you go, Harrison," Brad said, shoving the drink into my hand. "Double malt, just how you like it. Drink up. We have a big night ahead." I took the glass but didn't drink. I noticed immediately that the pour was heavy, almost triple a normal serving. They wanted me drunk. They wanted me pliable. I walked into the living room, feigning a slight limp, playing the part they had written for me. The gaslighting started before the appetizers were even served. I placed my car keys on the marble console table in the hallway. I saw exactly where I put them. 10 minutes later, as we were moving to the dining room, Brad frowned. "Harrison, did you take a cab here?" he asked loudly, making sure the housekeeper heard. "No, I drove. My keys are on the console," I replied calmly. Brad walked over to the table and made a show of looking. "They aren't here, Harrison. Are you sure you drove? You know, last week you told me you lost your wallet when it was in your pocket. Maybe you left them in the ignition." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I hadn't lost them. Brad had moved them. They were trying to build a narrative of forgetfulness, creating witnesses to my decline. I took a deep breath, channeling the cold logic I used when inspecting suspension cables for stress fractures. "I must have been mistaken," I lied, forcing a confused smile. "I'm getting older after all." Tiffany exchanged a quick, satisfied glance with Brad. It was subtle, but I caught it. It was the look of a predator watching the trap snap shut. Dinner was an exercise in torture. They reminisced about events that never happened. "Do you remember, Dad, when you got lost going to the grocery store last month?" Tiffany asked, pouring me more wine even though I hadn't touched the first glass. "I never got lost, Tiffany," I said, keeping my voice level. "Oh, Daddy, don't get defensive. It's okay. We just worry about you living alone in that big brownstone. It's a lot to manage for someone your age." I gripped the stem of my wine glass. They weren't just worried. They were reciting lines for a deposition. They were painting a picture of a senile old man to show a judge. I ate my steak in silence, letting them weave their web, the recorder in my pocket, capturing every condescending word, every fabricated memory. Then came the climax of the evening. We moved to the study for coffee. The room was lined with books Brad had never read. Tiffany went to the desk and pulled out a thick leather folder. "Dad, since it's your 75th, Brad and I..." Got you a little gift, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Well, it's not really a gift. It's more of a peace of mind thing. We had our family attorney look over the family trust. We just want to make sure your tax liabilities are minimized. It's just some standard updates. She placed the document in front of me and handed me a heavy gold pen. Just sign on the tabs, Brad said, hovering over my shoulder like a vulture. We can handle the filing on Monday. You don't need to worry about the details. I put on my reading glasses. My hands were steady, but I made them tremble slightly as I reached for the paper. I didn't look at the signature line. I looked at the body of the text. I skimmed past the standard legalese on the first few pages until I reached page 14. There it was. Buried in a paragraph about asset management was a clause for an immediate durable power of attorney. It wasn't contingent on a medical diagnosis. It wasn't for tax purposes. It transferred full, unrestricted control of my $24 million estate, my real estate holdings, and my bank accounts to Tiffany Caldwell Barnes, effective immediately upon signature. It was a death warrant for my independence. Brad tapped the paper. Right there, Harrison. Just a quick signature so we can get back to the birthday cake. I looked at the date on the document. It matched the date on the court filing James had warned me about. They were attacking me on two fronts. If I signed this, they wouldn't even need the court order. They would own me by morning. I looked up at my daughter. She was smiling, but her eyes were dead. There was no love there, only greed and desperation. I thought about the little girl I used to push on the swings, the teenager I taught to drive. That person was gone. In her place was a woman who would strip her father of his dignity to pay off her husband's gambling debts. I knew I couldn't simply refuse. If I refused, they might escalate. They might physically prevent me from leaving. They were desperate. I needed to destroy the weapon without revealing I knew it was a gun. I reached for my wine glass, the 1982 Bordeaux, that I had bought for a special occasion, an occasion much different than this. My hand hovered over the document. You know, I said, my voice cracking with feigned frailty. I really am feeling quite tired tonight. The keys. Getting lost. Maybe you are right. Tiffany's eyes lit up. Just sign, Daddy. We will take care of everything. I leaned forward, pen in hand, and then I let my elbow spasm. It was a precise movement calculated to look like a geriatric tremor. My arm knocked the full glass of red wine directly onto the document. The dark liquid exploded across the paper, soaking page 14, bleeding into the fibers, turning the ink into an illegible purple mess. Oh, I cried out, dropping the pen. Look at what I've done. I am so clumsy. No, Brad shouted, lunging for the table, but it was too late. The document was ruined. Tiffany's face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. You stupid old man, she hissed, forgetting her act for a split second. I stood up, grabbing a napkin and dabbing uselessly at the mess. I am so sorry. I think I need to go home. I'm not feeling well. You can't leave, Brad said, stepping between me and the door. We can print another copy. It will just take a minute. I looked at Brad. I stood up to my full height of 6'2". I dropped the act of the frail old man. I let the steel that built skyscrapers enter my spine. I said, I am going home, Brad. Move. The sudden shift in my demeanor stunned him. He stepped back instinctively. I walked past him, snatched my keys from the drawer where I had seen him hide them earlier. I had spotted the reflection in the hallway mirror and walked to the front door. Dad, wait, Tiffany called out, her voice shrill. I didn't turn back. I walked out into the cool night air, got into my car, and locked the doors. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. They were standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the light of the house my money had paid for. They looked small. They looked desperate. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. I didn't go home. I knew the war had just begun. They thought they were dealing with a helpless senior citizen. They were about to find out they were fighting a man who knew how to demolish a building without leaving a trace of dust. I was going to investigate every penny I had ever given them. I was going to find out why they were so desperate. And I was going to make sure that the only thing they inherited from me was a lesson in consequences. I did not sleep that night. Adrenaline is a powerful fuel even at 75. I sat in my study until the sun came up, organizing every financial statement I had in my possession. By 8 a.m., I was walking through the glass doors of James Sterling's law firm in Midtown Manhattan. James was already waiting for me, his face grim. Sitting across from him was a man I had only heard about in whispers. His name was Weiss. He didn't look like a forensic accountant. He looked like a tired college professor wearing a rumpled suit and thick glasses, but James assured me he was the best financial bloodhound in the city. I handed over my access codes, my social security number, and the authorization forms James had prepared. I told Weiss to tear apart everything. I wanted to know where every cent I had given my daughter over the last decade had gone. I wanted to know the financial health of my son-in-law, Brad. I wanted to know why they were so desperate that they tried to seize my life in a single night. Weiss worked in silence for 3 hours. The only sound in the conference room was the clicking of his keyboard and the hum of the server. James and I drank coffee watching the man dismantle the facade of my daughter's life. When Weiss finally stopped typing, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity but professional concern. He turned the monitor so I could see it. Mr. Caldwell, Weiss said, his voice dry and precise. You are not looking at a cash flow problem. You are looking at a catastrophe. On the screen was a complex web of transactions. Weiss pointed to a series of red lines. Your son-in-law, Brad, has not just been failing at startups. He has been gambling on unregulated cryptocurrency markets. Specifically, he leveraged everything he could access into a platform that collapsed 3 months ago. I leaned in, squinting at the numbers. The total loss was staggering. $8.5 million. It was money they didn't have. It was money they had borrowed from friends, from investors, and as I was about to find out, from dangerous sources. Weiss clicked another tab. This is where it gets worse, he said. They are insolvent. They have been living on credit cards to pay the interest on other credit cards. But the real issue is the house in the Hamptons. I felt a cold weight in my stomach. The Hamptons estate. I had paid the $2 million deposit. My name was on the deed alongside theirs. It was supposed to be a secure asset. Weiss pulled up a document from the county clerk's digital archives. It was a mortgage filing dated 6 months ago. It wasn't from a reputable bank like Chase or Wells Fargo. It was from a private equity lender called Shadow Creek Capital. These were hard money lenders, the kind that charged predatory interest rates and didn't ask too many questions as long as the collateral was good. They took out a third mortgage on the property, Weiss explained. They cashed out $4 million in equity. That is impossible, I said, my voice steady despite the shock. I am a co-owner. No bank would lend that amount of money on a jointly owned property without the signature of all owners. I never signed anything. Weiss looked at me. He didn't say a word. He just opened a PDF file and zoomed in on the signature line at the bottom of the poem. There it was. Harrison Caldwell. The signature looped and slanted exactly like mine. It was a forgery, but it was a masterclass in forgery. It was good enough to fool a loan officer who was looking the other way. I stared at the screen. My own name stolen. My credit hijacked. Weiss continued, his voice dropping an octave. Here is the kicker, Mr. Caldwell. The terms of this hard money loan are aggressive. It is a balloon payment structure. They missed the last 3 interest payments. Shadow Creek Capital issued a notice of default 5 days ago. If they do not pay the full principal plus penalties by next Friday, the lender forecloses. They lose the house. I did the math in my head. Next Friday. That was 7 days away. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. The desperation at dinner. The emergency guardianship filing. The immediate power of attorney. They didn't just want my money for a rainy day. They needed access to my liquid assets, my retirement accounts, and my investment portfolio within the week to pay off the loan shark before they lost the house and the fraud was exposed. They were going to liquidate my life to cover their crime. I stood up. I need to see the original documents, I said. I need to go to the bank that notarized this. James tried to stop me. Harrison, let me handle this. We can file an affidavit. No, I said. I need to see the face of the person who pretended to be me. We drove to the branch of the notary service listed on the loan documents. It was a small, nondescript office in Queens, far away from my usual circles. With James flashing his credentials and threatening immediate legal action for facilitating fraud, the manager was terrified. He was sweating as he pulled up the security footage from the date of the signing. We stood in the back office watching the grainy monitor. I saw Brad walk in. He looked nervous, checking his watch. And then a moment later, I saw myself walk in. Or at least someone who was supposed to be me. The man on the screen was about my height. He wore a hat pulled low and a surgical mask, which wasn't uncommon these days, but he also wore sunglasses. He leaned heavily on a cane. He played the part of a frail, sickly old man perfectly. He sat where Brad pointed. He signed where Brad pointed. He didn't read a single page. I watched Brad pat the imposter on the back, a gesture of thanks for a job well done. It was sickening. They had hired an actor. They had staged a play to rob me of my property rights. I froze the frame on the imposter's face. I looked at Brad's smiling face next to him. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This wasn't a daughter asking for too much allowance. This was a felony. This was wire fraud. This was identity theft. This was a conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen. I felt something die inside me as I watched that video. The last lingering hope that this was all a misunderstanding vanished. The image of Tiffany as a little girl faded, replaced by the woman who would orchestrate this charade. She wasn't in the video, but she benefited from the crime. She knew. She had to know. I turned to the manager. I want a copy of this footage, and I want a certified copy of the notary logbook. Now. We walked out of the bank and into the bright afternoon sun. The city noise seemed distant, muffled by the rage pounding in my ears. I walked to my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I looked at James. Harrison, James said softly. We have enough to file a civil suit. We have enough to stop the guardianship. I looked straight ahead, watching the traffic flow down the avenue. No, James, I said. This isn't civil anymore. He isn't just a bad son-in-law. He is a criminal. And my daughter is his accomplice. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs, stiffening my resolve like concrete setting in a mold. Freeze it all, I commanded. James blinked. Everything. Everything I said. Contact the banks. Contact the investment brokers. Put a lock on every joint account. Flag the Hamptons title for fraud. Cut off the credit cards. Cancel the monthly stipend. I want every single financial artery that connects me to them severed within the hour. But Harrison, James warned, if we do that, the lender will foreclose. They will lose the house. They will have nothing. I started the engine. The roar of the motor felt good. It felt like power returning to my hands. They stole my signature, James. They tried to steal my mind. They tried to erase me. Let them have nothing. Let them see what the world looks like when they have to stand on their own 2 feet without my wallet to prop them up. Do it, now. James moved with the efficiency of a surgeon. Within minutes of my command, the machinery of my wealth began to grind in reverse. I sat in his office listening to him issue orders to bank managers who knew my voice better than they knew their own children. One by one, the accounts were locked. The credit lines were suspended. The automatic transfers that had fueled my daughter's illusion of a successful life were terminated. It was a silent digital demolition, but in my mind I could hear the crashing of steel and the shattering of glass. I didn't have to wait long to see the dust settle. The first casualty was Tiffany's dignity. It happened at 2 in the afternoon. She was at the Elysium Spa on Fifth Avenue, a sanctuary of marble and orchids, where she spent more money on facials than most families spent on groceries. I knew her schedule because I paid the bills. She had just finished a 3-hour treatment, a package that cost $1,200. When she handed the platinum card to the receptionist, she likely did it with that casual, dismissive wave of the wrist she had perfected over the years. I can imagine the receptionist's polite smile faltering as she swiped the card. Then swiped it again. Then the quiet, apologetic whisper. "I am sorry, Mrs. Barnes. The card has been declined. Code 05. Do not honor." Tiffany would have laughed it off at first. A mistake. A glitch in the system. She would have pulled out the backup card, the gold one linked to the joint account I used for household emergencies. Declined. Then the debit card. Declined. For the first time in her adult life, Tiffany stood at a counter with a bill she could not pay. She had to call Brad, but Brad's cards were also linked to my credit profile as authorized user extensions. They were dead plastic. She had to leave her driver's license as collateral and walk out onto the busy Manhattan street, her skin glowing from the treatment, but her face burning with a shame she had never known. At the same time, the automated banking system sent out the alerts regarding the monthly stipend. For 5 years, on the 15th of every month, $15,000 was wired directly into their operating account. It was the lifeline that paid their mortgage, their car leases, their country club dues. Today was the 15th. The transfer was scheduled for 4:00 p.m. At 4:01 p.m. they received a notification. Transfer canceled by authorization of account holder. Insufficient permissions. That $15,000 was already spent in their minds. It was earmarked for the loan shark for the minimum payments on the maxed-out visas. Without it, the house of cards didn't just wobble. It collapsed. The final nail in the coffin was the legal notice regarding the Hamptons property. James filed a notice of pendency, effectively a red flag on the property title alleging fraud and forgery. It froze any potential sale. It alerted the lender, Shadow Creek Capital, that the collateral for their loan was contested. It meant they couldn't sell the house to pay off the debt, and they couldn't refinance. They were trapped in a burning building with the doors welded shut. My phone began to ring at 4:15 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By 5:00 p.m. there were 20 missed calls and a string of text messages that devolved from confusion to panic to vitriol. I finally answered on the 21st ring. I put the phone on speaker and set it on my mahogany desk, pouring myself a glass of water as her voice filled the room. "You petty, tyrannical dictator," Tiffany screamed, her voice shredding her vocal cords. "How could you?" I was humiliated. "Do you hear me? Humiliated in front of everyone? They cut up my car, Dad. They cut it up right in front of me." I took a sip of water. "Hello, Tiffany. I trust your facial was relaxing." "You are a monster," she shrieked. "You cut us off. We have bills due tomorrow. We have the mortgage. What are we supposed to do? You are supposed to get jobs." "Tiffany," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You are 42 years old. Figure it out. You can't do this. This is financial abuse. I will tell the judge. I will tell everyone." "You filed a petition claiming I was incompetent," I reminded her. "If I am incompetent, then surely I shouldn't be managing your finances. I am just simplifying my estate as any prudent person would do." She screamed something incoherent, a mix of profanity and sobbing, before the line went dead. She had hung up, or perhaps she had thrown the phone against the wall. An hour later, the rage shifted from the daughter to the son-in-law. I was at my brownstone in the Upper East Side, sitting in the library by the front window. The street was quiet, lined with gas lamps and old trees. Then the roar of an engine shattered the peace. It was Brad. He was driving the Porsche 911 Turbo S that he had leased 2 years ago. I had co-signed the lease because his credit score was in the low 500s. He parked it illegally in front of a fire hydrant, mounting the curb with a careless aggression that made me wince. He stormed up the steps and began pounding on my heavy oak door. "Harrison, open this door. We need to talk. You think you can just pull the plug? You think you can starve us out?" I didn't move to open the door. I stayed by the window watching. I checked my watch. The timing should be perfect. I had called the leasing company 3 hours ago. I had informed them that as the guarantor I was revoking my security on the vehicle and that the primary driver had defaulted on the insurance payments, which was true, another bill they had skipped this month. I told them exactly where the car would be at 6:30 p.m. Brad was kicking the bottom of the door now, shouting about lawyers and rights he didn't have. He was so focused on his tantrum that he didn't hear the heavy rumble of the tow truck turning the corner. It was a large flatbed equipped for high-end recoveries. The driver didn't hesitate. He backed up to the Porsche with practiced speed. Brad heard the hydraulics hiss. He spun around, his face going pale. Hey, what are you doing? That's my car." He ran down the steps, waving his arms. "Get away from it." The driver, a burly man who had likely seen 1,000 Brads in his career, didn't even look up as he hooked the chains onto the axle. "Repossession order, buddy. Step back or I call the cops." "No, you can't. My father-in-law pays for it." "It's a mistake," Brad yelled, grabbing the door handle of the car as if he could physically hold it back. The driver engaged the winch. The Porsche groaned as it was dragged backward onto the tilted bed. Brad watched helpless as his symbol of status, his shield against reality, was hoisted into the air. I watched Brad standing on the sidewalk, defeated. He looked up at my window. He couldn't see me through the sheer curtains, but he knew I was there. He raised a shaking fist, mouthing curses before turning and walking away down the street, looking for a cab he probably couldn't afford. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I only felt the cold satisfaction of a structural engineer watching a controlled demolition proceed exactly according to plan. Night fell over the city. The silence in my house was heavy. I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. I knew it wasn't over. Desperation makes people stupid. Desperation makes people brave in all the wrong ways. Around 200 a.m. I heard a sound. It was faint, the click of a tumbler turning the soft creak of a hinge. It was coming from the back entrance, the garden door. I didn't turn on the lights. I picked up my tablet and opened the security app. The night vision cameras painted the scene in ghostly greens and grays. It was Tiffany. She was wearing a hoodie pulled up over her head and dark gloves. She had used the emergency spare key that Catherine, my late wife, had given her 10 years ago for watering the plants when we traveled. She moved through the kitchen, avoiding the floorboards that creaked. She knew this house. She had grown up here. She wasn't heading for the silverware or the art. She moved straight to the master bedroom, to the walk-in closet, where Catherine had kept her personal safe. I watched on the screen as she knelt before the wall safe hidden behind a row of winter coats. Her movements were frantic. She punched in a code. 0915, her birthday. The red light on the keypad blinked. Error. She tried again. 1225. Christmas. Error. She paused, breathing hard. I could see the panic in her body language. She tried a third code. 0614. Catherine's birthday. Error. Lockout initiated. She slammed her fist against the safe door, a silent scream of frustration. She needed liquid assets. She knew Catherine's jewelry collection was in there. The sapphire necklace, the diamond tennis bracelets, the heirlooms that were worth $500,000. She intended to steal them. She intended to pawn her dead mother's legacy to save her husband's skin. I set the tablet down. I stood up and walked to the staircase. My footsteps were deliberate, heavy enough to be heard. I wanted her to know I was coming. I walked into the bedroom and flipped the switch. The chandelier flooded the room with unforgiving light. Tiffany spun around. She was holding a small velvet box she had found on the dresser, thinking it might contain something of value. It was empty. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes wide, her face pale, the hood sliding back to reveal matted hair. She didn't try to run. There was nowhere to go. She just stood there, clutching the empty box, caught in the act of robbing her own father. "You changed the code," she whispered, her voice trembling with accusation rather than guilt. "You knew I would come. You changed it to lock me out." I looked at her, and for a moment I saw the toddler who used to sneak cookies before dinner. But that ghost vanished, replaced by the thief standing before me. "I didn't change it, Tiffany," I said, my voice cold as the grave. She frowned, confused. "What?" "Your mother changed it," I said. Tiffany shook her head. "That's impossible. She died 3 years ago." I walked closer to her, stopping just out of reach. "3 days before she died, your mother asked me to help her reset the combination. She was weak, but her mind was clear. She told me she had a bad feeling. She told me that she loved you, but she didn't trust Brad, and she didn't trust who you were becoming when you were with him." Tiffany flinched, as if I had slapped her. "Mom wouldn't do that. She loved me." "She did love you," I agreed. "That is why she protected her legacy from you. She knew this day would come. She knew that sooner or later you would come for the things she loved to pay for the mistakes you made." I pointed to the door. "Get out." "Dad, please," she sobbed, dropping the empty velvet box on the floor. "They are going to kill him. If we don't pay Shadow Creek, they are going to hurt Brad. We need the money. Just let me have the necklace. Just the sapphire one." I looked at the empty box on the floor. It was a perfect metaphor for our relationship. "The sapphire necklace isn't for you," I said. "It never was. Now get out of my house before I call the police and add burglary to the list of crimes we will be discussing in court." She looked at me one last time, realizing that the well had truly run dry. She ran past me down the stairs and out into the night, leaving the back door wide open to the cold wind. I walked over and closed it, locking the deadbolt. I was alone in the house, but for the first time in a long time I felt safe. The enemy was no longer inside the gates. I walked past my daughter, who was still trembling by the bedroom door, and went to the antique vanity that had belonged to her mother. I didn't look at Tiffany. I looked at the mirror, pushing aside a silver hairbrush to reveal a small, almost invisible seam in the wood. It was a false bottom, a trick of carpentry I had installed for Catherine 40 years ago when we bought our first valuables. I pressed the hidden latch, and the wood clicked open. From the dark recess, I pulled out a long navy blue leather case. I turned around and placed it on the bed. With a flick of my thumb, I opened the lid. The room seemed to grow brighter. The sapphire and diamond set a necklace and matching earrings worth $400,000 glittered under the chandelier light. They were deep blue, like the ocean at midnight stones that Catherine had worn only on our anniversaries. Tiffany gasped, her eyes locking onto the jewels with a hunger that turned my stomach. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out instinctively. "Don't I said my voice sharp enough to cut glass?" She froze. "Why did you hide them? Why did Mom change the code?" I picked up the necklace, letting the heavy stones run through my fingers like water. "Because we knew you, Tiffany. We knew you better than you know yourself. Do you remember when you were 12, you stole your teacher's wallet? You said you found it, but we found the cash in your pillowcase. We paid the teacher back and hushed it up. When you were 16, you shoplifted a designer scarf from Saks. I went down to the precinct and used my connections to wipe the record. We thought we were protecting you. We thought we were loving you." I dropped the necklace back into the box with a heavy thud. "But we were wrong. We were just teaching you that there are no consequences. We were teaching you that if you want something, you just take it, and Daddy will write a check to make the problem go away." Catherine realized it before I did. She told me that if she died first, you would come for these. She said you wouldn't see them as memories. You would only see them as liquid assets to fuel your lifestyle. Tiffany's face hardened, the mask of the victim falling away to reveal the entitlement underneath. She stopped crying. She straightened her spine and looked at me with pure venom. "So what?" she screamed, her voice echoing in the large room. "She is dead, Dad. She doesn't need them anymore. I am alive. I have bills. I have a life that is falling apart. The money should be mine. It is my inheritance. Why are you hoarding it like a dragon while your own daughter drowns? It is not your inheritance," I replied calmly. "It is my property. And frankly, I would rather throw these gems into the Hudson River than let them pay for Brad's mistakes." I held out my hand, palm open. "Give me the key, Tiffany." She clutched the spare key in her fist, her knuckles white. "No." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move toward her. I simply stated a fact. "If you walk out of here with that key, I will call the police immediately. I will report an intruder. I will show them the security footage of you cracking the safe. You are already facing a foreclosure and a mountain of debt. Do you want a felony burglary charge on top of that? Give me the key." She stared at me, a war raging behind her eyes. She calculated the odds and realized she had no leverage left. With a scream of frustration, she threw the key at me. It hit my chest and clattered to the floor. I didn't flinch. I stooped down and picked it up, slipping it into my pocket. "You are no longer welcome in this house," I said. "I am revoking your access. I am revoking your status as my daughter. You are a stranger to me now. A stranger who tried to rob an old man in the middle of the night." She backed out into the hallway, but before she turned to run, she stopped. A cruel, twisted smile appeared on her face. "You think you have won," she hissed. "You think this is over. The hearing is in 3 days, old man. You can change the locks and hide the diamonds, but you can't hide from the court." "I will tell the judge everything," she continued, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I will tell them about your paranoia. I will tell them how you hoard things. I will tell them you are a danger to yourself. And when they grant me guardianship, I will put you in the darkest, cheapest state facility I can find. You will rot in there, Dad. And while you rot, I will sell this house, I will sell those diamonds, and I will spend every single dime you have. You will regret tonight for the rest of your miserable life." She turned and ran down the stairs. I heard the front door slam, shaking the frame of the house. I stood there in the silence, holding the key, feeling the weight of her threat settling on my shoulders. She wasn't just angry. She was committed. She was going to try to declare me insane to get what she wanted. I closed the velvet box and put it back in the hidden compartment, locking it tight. I didn't go back to sleep. I went to my study and opened my laptop. If they wanted to question my mind, I would give them an answer they couldn't ignore. I spent the rest of the night researching. I looked up the best neurologists in New York City. I looked up the standard protocols for competency hearings. I wasn't going to wait for the court to order an evaluation. I was going to get there first. At 7:00 a.m., I was dressed in a fresh suit, shaved and ready for battle. I drove into the city, fighting the morning traffic with the aggressive precision of a man on a mission. My first stop was New York Presbyterian Hospital. I walked into the neurology department and demanded a full cognitive evaluation. "I don't have an appointment," I told the receptionist, handing her my platinum insurance card. "But I am willing to wait all day. I need a certified mental capacity assessment, and I need it today." It took 4 hours of waiting, but I finally saw Dr. Aris, a leading specialist in geriatric neurology. He looked at me skeptically. At first, a man demanding to prove he wasn't crazy usually raises red flags. but I explained the situation clearly. My daughter is filing for guardianship. I need objective proof of my competency. He put me through the ringer. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment. The mini mental state examination. He made me count backward from 100 by sevens. 93, 86, 79, 72. I didn't hesitate. He asked me to remember 5 words, face Velvet Church, Daisy Red, and recall them 5 minutes later, then 20 minutes later. I repeated them back to him in the exact order. He asked me to draw a clock face set to 10 past 11. My circle was perfect, the hands precise. I didn't stop there. I left Presbyterian and drove to Mount Sinai. I repeated the process. Different doctor, same tests. Then I went to NYU Langone. 3 hospitals. 3 independent evaluations. 3 top-tier specialists. By 5:00 p.m. I sat in my car with 3 sealed envelopes in my briefcase. Each one contained a signed medical affidavit stating that Harrison Caldwell was fully oriented to time, place, and person, with superior cognitive function for his age, and absolutely no signs of dementia or Alzheimer's. My mind was a fortress, and I now had the blueprints to prove it. I felt a surge of triumph. I had anticipated their move, and I had blocked it. I pulled out my phone to call James Sterling and tell him the good news. "James," I said when he answered, "I have the documents. 3 clean bills of health. They can't touch me. The guardianship petition is dead in the water." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't the silence of relief. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of bad news. Harrison James said, his voice tight. "That is good, but we have a new problem. A serious one. What could be worse than the medical records?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Tiffany's lawyer just filed an addendum to the petition," James explained. "They aren't just relying on their own testimony anymore. They have a witness, an independent witness who is willing to testify under oath that you have been exhibiting signs of severe cognitive decline for months." "Who?" I demanded. "Who would lie for them? A woman named Sarah Jenkins," James said. The name hit me like a physical blow. Sarah Jenkins. She was a private nurse we had hired 2 years ago to help care for Catherine in her final months. She had been in our home every day. She knew our routines. She knew our private conversations. She had been kind, or so I thought. She claims, James continued reading from the filing, that during her time in your employment, she witnessed you talking to people who weren't there, forgetting to eat for days, and leaving the gas stove on. She claims you were already showing signs of early-onset dementia back then, and that it has clearly progressed. "She is lying," I said, my voice rising. "I fired her because I caught her stealing prescription painkillers from Catherine's bedside table. I didn't report her because I didn't want the hassle while my wife was dying." "That may be true, Harrison, but there is no police report for that." "Theft is there?" James asked gently. "No," I admitted. "Then it is her word against yours," James said. "And right now she is a healthcare professional signing a sworn affidavit that supports your daughter's narrative. Tiffany must have found her and paid her off. They are building a case, Harrison. They are buying a reality where you are insane, and they are doing it very effectively." I looked out the window at the busy New York street. The 3 envelopes on the passenger seat suddenly felt lighter, less like a shield and more like paper. They had bought a witness. They had weaponized my mercy against me. I hung up the phone and started the car. The war wasn't over. It had just gotten dirtier. If they wanted to play in the mud, I would have to get down there with them. I needed to find out how much they paid Sarah Jenkins, and I needed to prove she was a liar before the judge banged his gavel. My structural integrity was holding, but the stress fractures were beginning to show. I drove home plotting my next move, knowing that the most dangerous enemy is the one who knows your secrets. 3 days before the court hearing, the Cold War turned hot. I was in my kitchen brewing coffee and reviewing the dossiers Weiss had compiled on Sarah Jenkins, the lying nurse. It was a gray, overcast Tuesday morning. I watched the street through the security monitor mounted under the cabinet. A white van pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a commercial delivery truck, and it wasn't a registered ambulance. It was a nondescript cargo van with mud on the license plates. My stomach tightened. I watched as the side door slid open and two men stepped out. They were not medical professionals. They were large, wearing generic scrubs that fit poorly the kind you can buy at any uniform supply store. Following them, stepping out of his leased sedan parked behind the van, was Brad. He looked agitated, pacing on the sidewalk, gesturing at my front door. I didn't wait for them to knock. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. I gave the operator my address and stated clearly that there were intruders attempting to force entry into my home. I didn't hang up. I put the phone in my pocket, leaving the line open so the dispatch could hear everything. Then I went to the central security panel in the hallway. I punched in the code that engaged the magnetic locks on every exterior door and lowered the steel security shutters over the ground floor windows. I had installed this system 5 years ago thinking it was paranoia. Today it was a lifeline. The doorbell rang, insistent and angry. I ignored it. Then came the pounding. Harrison Brad's voice was muffled by the heavy oak. "Open up! We have a court order. We are here to take you to a specialist." I checked the monitor again. One of the men in scrubs was holding a clipboard, but the other was holding a pry bar concealed behind his leg. They weren't here for a checkup. They were here to snatch me. If they could get me into that van, they would drive me to a private lockdown memory care facility in upstate New York. They would sedate me, confiscate my phone, and ensure I missed the hearing on Friday. If I didn't show up to court, the judge would assume I was incapacitated or missing, and Tiffany would be granted temporary guardianship by default. It was a brute force checkmate. I walked to the intercom system and pressed the button that broadcast my voice to the front porch speakers. "Go away, Brad," I said. My voice amplified and booming across the quiet street. "I know what you're doing. Open the door." "Harrison," Brad screamed, kicking the wood. "You are sick. You're trying to help you." I saw the man with the pry bar look at Brad, waiting for a signal. Brad nodded. The man jammed the steel bar into the doorframe and leaned his weight into it. The wood groaned, but the deadbolts held. I didn't panic. I felt a cold, tactical calm wash over me. I pressed the talk button again. "Listen to me closely, Brad," I said. "You are currently trespassing. You are attempting to break and enter an occupied dwelling. In this state, we operate under the Castle Doctrine. That means I have no duty to retreat. That means I am authorized to use lethal force to protect myself inside my own home." The man with the pry bar froze. He looked at the camera, realizing for the first time that this wasn't a confused geriatric he was dealing with. "I do not have a gun in my hand right now." I lied, my voice steady as granite. "But I can get to my safe in 10 seconds. Do you want to gamble your life on how fast you can break that lock?" Brad hesitated. He looked at the house, then at his hired muscle. He was sweating. He hadn't expected a siege. He had expected a victim. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air, rising in the distance. I had timed it perfectly. "The police are 2 minutes away," I announced. "I suggest you run." The two men in scrubs didn't wait for permission. The moment they heard the sirens, they dropped the pry bar and bolted for the van. They were mercenaries, not martyrs. They peeled away from the curb tires, screeching. Brad was left standing alone on my porch. He looked at the camera lens, his face twisted in a mixture of fury and terror. He knew he had failed. He knew he had just left physical evidence of an attempted kidnapping on my doorstep. He scrambled back to his car and sped off just as the patrol cruisers turned the corner at the end of the block. I gave the police the footage. I showed them the damage to the doorframe. They took a report, but without Brad present, they couldn't arrest him immediately. They treated it as a domestic dispute gone wrong, a welfare check that got out of hand. But I had the video. I had the proof that my son-in-law tried to use force to silence me. That evening, I sat in my study, the adrenaline finally fading into exhaustion. My phone pinged. It was an encrypted message from Weiss. We got him the message read. He clicked the link. Weiss had sent a phishing email to Brad's personal account earlier that day, disguised as a support ticket from the crypto exchange where Brad had lost the millions. It promised a way to recover some of the lost funds. Brad, greedy and desperate, had clicked it instantly. The malware Weiss installed gave us remote access to his microphone. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and opened the audio file attached to the message. It was a recording from inside Brad's car, time-stamped 2 hours after the incident at my house. The audio was clear. If you're still watching, comment, and let me know you're with me. And tell me, if this were your family, what would you do next? And just so you're aware, the next part of this story includes some dramatized elements and may not reflect every detail exactly as it happened. If you'd rather not continue, this is the moment to stop watching. I could hear the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thumping of windshield wipers. Brad was on the phone, likely using the car's Bluetooth system. It didn't work, Tiff, Brad said, his voice tight with panic. The old man is crazy. He locked the place down. The cops showed up. I heard my daughter's voice on the other end. It was tinny coming through the car speakers, but unmistakable. So what do we do? We are out of time, Brad. The hearing is Friday. If he walks into that courtroom with those medical records, we are dead. We lose the house. We lose everything. I listened, holding my breath. We can't let him get to court, Brad said. There was a pause, a heavy, dark silence. What are you saying? Tiffany asked. I am saying the nursing home idea is dead, Brad replied. We need something more permanent. Something that looks like an accident. My blood ran cold. Brad continued. He drives that old Jaguar everywhere. It doesn't have modern safety features. If he were to run off the road, or if his brakes failed, Tiffany said, her voice wavering. It solves everything, Brad shouted, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. The thump echoed in my headphones. Think about it. The guardianship petition becomes moot. The estate goes into probate. You are the sole heir. We get the $24 million. We pay off Shadow Creek. We pay off the crypto debt. And what? And the life insurance, Brad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The policy pays double indemnity for accidental death. That is another $5 million tax-free. We need that money, Tiffany. We need it to survive. I waited. I waited for my daughter to scream. I waited for her to tell him he was insane. I waited for her to threaten to call the police on her own husband. I waited for the little girl I raised to show up and defend her father's life. Instead, there was a long sigh on the recording. Just don't tell me the details, Tiffany said softly. Just make sure it doesn't look like us. And make sure it happens before Friday morning. The recording ended. I sat there in the silence of my study, the headphones still over my ears. My hands were shaking, not with the tremors of age, but with the violent vibrations of a heart breaking into pieces. I had prepared myself for theft. I had prepared myself for fraud. I had prepared myself for the loss of my money and my house. But I hadn't prepared myself for this. My daughter had just sanctioned my murder. She hadn't pulled the trigger, but she had looked the other way while her husband loaded the gun. She had weighed my life against her lifestyle, and she had chosen the money. I took the headphones off and laid them on the desk. I looked at the framed photograph of Catherine and me holding Tiffany when she was a baby. I picked up the frame and walked over to the trash can. I didn't throw it with anger. I dropped it gently. It landed face down. The father in me died in that moment. The man who would have sacrificed anything for his child ceased to exist. In his place sat Harrison Caldwell, the engineer. I was looking at a structural failure that could not be repaired. The building had to be condemned. I saved the audio file to 3 different cloud servers. I sent a copy to James Sterling. I sent a copy to the detective who had taken the report earlier. They wanted a car accident. They wanted a tragedy. I would give them a tragedy, but it wouldn't be on the highway. It would be in the courtroom. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to wait for them to cut my brake lines. I was going to take the offensive. I was going to destroy them, with the one thing they feared more than anything else, the absolute, undeniable truth. The next morning, I walked into James Sterling's office not as a victim, but as an architect ready to redesign the landscape of my legacy. The audio recording of my daughter sanctioning my murder was safely stored on 3 encrypted servers, but I was not going to use it yet. That was for the criminal investigation. Today was about the money. It was about cutting the fuel line to their engine of destruction. I sat across from James and told him to initiate the nuclear option. We were going to rewrite the entire estate plan. James looked at me over his glasses, his pen hovering over the legal pad. "Are you sure, Harrison? Once we execute this, there is no going back. This is a total disinheritance." "I am sure," I said. "Draft a new, revocable living trust. Move the $24 million in liquid assets, the investment portfolio, and the title to the brownstone into it immediately. And I want a specific provision added to the will, a no-contest clause, an in terrorem clause." James nodded, understanding the severity. If Tiffany or Brad challenges the validity of the will or the trust in any way, they automatically forfeit any and all inheritance. They get zero, not a dollar, not a cent. "Exactly," I said. "But we need a beneficiary, someone who won't squander my life's work on gambling and vanity." I pulled a photograph from my wallet. It was a picture of my niece, Maya. She was the daughter of my son who had passed away 20 years ago. We had lost touch after Catherine died, not because of animosity, but because life drifts apart. Maya was 25 now, living in Boston, working 2 jobs to pay off her student loans from engineering school. She was building things. She was struggling, but she was doing it honestly. Make Maya the sole beneficiary, I ordered. Establish an educational trust for her, and donate the remainder to the Structural Engineering Scholarship Fund at MIT in Catherine's name. Tiffany gets nothing. We spent 4 hours finalizing the language. I signed the documents with a steady hand. With each signature, I felt a weight lifting. I was severing the financial umbilical cord that had strangled our relationship. When we were done, James looked at the stack of papers. "This protects your assets, Harrison, but it doesn't stop the hearing on Friday. They are still going to try to paint you as incompetent. If the judge grants the guardianship, they could theoretically challenge these changes, claiming you weren't of sound mind when you signed them today." "I know," I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. "That is why I have to give the performance of a lifetime. I need them to believe they have already won. I need them to be overconfident." I left the office and enacted the second phase of my plan. I leaked a rumor. I called a family friend who I knew was a gossip, a woman who played bridge with Tiffany's mother-in-law. I told her in a trembling voice that I was terrified of the court hearing, that I was confused, and that I just wanted to make peace with my daughter before the judge took everything away. The bait was taken within the hour. Tiffany texted me, "Meet me at the Starbucks on 3rd Avenue. We can talk." I arrived early. I chose a table in the corner, but one that was clearly visible to the security cameras I had noted upon entering. I sat down and hunched my shoulders. I took off my expensive watch and put it in my pocket. I ruffled my hair slightly to look disheveled. When Tiffany walked in, she looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. She was wearing sunglasses and carrying a large designer tote bag. She didn't hug me. She sat down opposite me and placed her phone on the table face down. I knew immediately that it was recording. She wanted a confession. She wanted audio of her father sounding senile to play for the judge. I decided to give her exactly what she wanted, but with a twist. "I am so glad you came, Tiffany," I said, my voice wavering. I don't know what is happening to me. The days seem so long. I get confused about the dates." Tiffany leaned in, a cruel smile playing on her lips. It is okay, Dad. That is why we are doing this. We just want to help you. You know you can't manage your money anymore. You forgot to pay our bills, remember? I looked down at my hands, wringing them together. I just want it to stop, Tiff. The noise, the pressure. Maybe you are right. Maybe I should just sign the papers. I am so tired of fighting. She reached out and patted my hand. Her touch was cold. You don't have to fight, Daddy. Just tell the judge on Friday that you agree to the guardianship. Tell him you know you need help. If you do that, we won't put you in the state facility. We will find a nice place for you, a private room. She was bargaining with my freedom. She was recording me agreeing to my own imprisonment. I looked up at her, my eyes wide with feigned fear. You promise. You promise you won't let them take me away. I promise, she lied. Just let us handle everything. The house, the money. It is too much stress for you. Brad and I will take the burden off your shoulders. I let out a shuddering sigh. Okay. Okay, Tiffany. I trust you. You are my daughter. You wouldn't hurt me. I saw the triumph in her eyes. She thought she had the smoking gun. She thought she had a recording of me admitting defeat, admitting confusion. She didn't realize that under the laws of our state, entrapment and coercion, recorded without consent, could backfire spectacularly if context was provided. And I was providing the context of a terrified old man being manipulated. She left 10 minutes later, walking with a bounce in her step. She was so sure of her victory that she probably wouldn't even bother prepping her lawyer. She thought I was broken. She didn't know she had just had coffee with a man who had already transferred $24 million out of her reach. That night, the house was quiet. I didn't turn on the television. I poured myself a single glass of 18-year-old single malt scotch and sat in the leather armchair in the library. The house felt big. It felt empty. For decades, this silence had been filled with the sounds of a family. Tiffany practicing piano, Catherine laughing on the phone, the dog barking at the mailman. Now it was just me and the ghosts of the past. I looked at the portrait of Catherine above the fireplace. It was painted 20 years ago when her hair was still dark and her eyes were bright. I raised my glass to her. I am sorry, Catherine, I whispered to the empty room. I tried. God knows I tried to keep her safe, but I failed. I raised a monster, and tomorrow I have to do the most cruel thing a father can ever do. I have to destroy her to save myself. I drank the scotch. It burned, going down a welcome fire in the cold numbness of my chest. I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing it for dignity. I was doing it so that the name Caldwell would mean something other than victim. My phone buzzed on the side table. It was a secure text message from James Sterling. I picked it up and read the screen. The message was short, but it hit with the force of a demolition charge. James wrote, "Everything is locked and loaded. The forensic team verified the audio. But Harrison, we have a new development. We monitored Brad's offshore activity. He just wired $50,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands linked to the Honorable Judge Marcus Thorne, the judge presiding over your hearing tomorrow." I stared at the screen. They hadn't just tried to kill me. They hadn't just tried to rob me. They had bribed a sitting judge. They were so desperate, so terrified of the truth coming out, that they had committed a federal crime to ensure the verdict. I read the second part of James's message. Do not worry. We did not call the local police. We called the FBI. They are setting up a sting. Tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. Get some sleep, Harrison. You are going to need it. I put the phone down. I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, absolute resolve. They had escalated this to a level I hadn't anticipated, but one I was fully prepared to meet. They wanted a court hearing. They were going to get a federal indictment. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room in darkness, ready for the dawn. The air in the family court was stale, smelling of floor wax and old paper, a scent that I had always associated with order and justice, but today reeked of conspiracy. I sat at the defendant's table next to James Sterling, my back straight, my hands folded on the polished wood. Across the aisle, Tiffany sat with her attorney, a man named Cohen, who wore a suit that cost more than my first car. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She held a tissue to her nose, dabbing at dry eyes, her shoulders hunched in a posture of practiced defeat. To the casual observer, she looked like a heartbroken daughter forced to make a terrible decision for the good of her beloved father. To me, she looked like a crocodile waiting for a wildebeest to slip into the water. Judge Marcus Thorne entered the room. He was a heavy man with a face that looked like it had been carved from dough. He didn't look at me. He looked briefly at Tiffany, giving her a nod that was almost imperceptible, a nod that $50,000 in an offshore account had purchased. I felt a cold knot of rage in my stomach, but I kept my face blank. I was a statue. I was concrete. The proceedings began with Cohen laying out the narrative they had constructed. He spoke of my decline with a somber, respectful tone that made me want to vomit. He painted a picture of a man who had once been a titan of industry, but was now a shell, a danger to himself and his fortune. "Your Honor," Cohen said, walking toward the bench, "we do not do this lightly. It is with heavy hearts that we present evidence of Mr. Caldwell's rapid deterioration." He dimmed the lights and played a video on the courtroom monitors. It was a montage, a greatest hits collection of my manufactured senility. There was the clip from the birthday dinner zoomed in on my hand shaking as I reached for the wine glass, edited to make the tremor look violent and uncontrollable. There was a clip from security footage at a grocery store where I had dropped my keys, slowed down to make my reaction time look glacial. There was audio taken out of context of me asking Tiffany where she was, making it sound like I didn't know who she was. It was a masterpiece of deception. The man on the screen looked confused, frail, and lost. If I didn't know the context, if I didn't know that the wine spill was a tactical maneuver to avoid signing a power of attorney, I might have believed I was sick. Tiffany let out a small, audible sob as the video ended. The judge looked at her with performative sympathy. "Thank you, Mr. Cohen, Judge," Thorne said, his voice grave. "The court appreciates the difficulty of this situation for the family." James Sterling leaned over to me. "They are playing to the gallery, Harrison. Stay calm. Let them build their tower. We will knock it down." Cohen called his star witness. "Sarah Jenkins." The side door opened and the nurse walked in. She was wearing a modest dress, her hair pulled back, looking every inch the reliable healthcare professional. She walked to the stand and took the oath without hesitation. She swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, while I sat there knowing she had sold her integrity for a payout from my daughter. "Ms. Jenkins," Cohen asked, "can you describe your time in the Caldwell household?" Sarah looked at the jury box, avoiding my gaze entirely. "I was hired to care for the late Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice soft and steady. "But over time I began to act as a caregiver for Mr. Caldwell as well." "And what did you observe? He was confused," she lied. "He would have conversations with people who weren't in the room. He would call me Catherine. He would leave the gas stove on and walk away. I had to follow him around to make sure he didn't burn the house down." I gripped the edge of the table. The gas stove. That was a lie fabricated from whole cloth. I had been the one to catch her leaving the stove on when she was high on stolen pills. "Did he ever become aggressive?" Cohen asked. Sarah nodded, squeezing out a tear. "Yes. When I tried to correct him or help him, he would get angry. He would shout. I was afraid for my safety, and I was afraid for him. That is why I had to leave. I couldn't watch him deteriorate like that." Judge Thorne shook his head sadly, making a note on his pad. "Mr. Sterling." "You may cross-examine," he said, his tone suggesting that it was a formality, that his mind was already made up. James stood up, buttoning his jacket. But before he could speak, I put a hand on his arm. "No," I whispered. "I want to do it." James looked at me. This was a risk. Usually lawyers handled the heavy lifting, but James knew the plan. He knew that to prove I wasn't incompetent, I had to be the one to dismantle the lie. He nodded and sat back down. "Your Honor," James said, "Mr. Caldwell would like to address the court and the witness directly." Judge Thorne frowned. "Mr. Sterling is that wise given your client's condition." I stood up. My movement was fluid, powerful. I didn't use the table for support. I walked to the center of the room and stood before the bench. I looked Judge Thorne in the eye, letting him see the clarity, the sharpness that had terrified junior engineers for 40 years. My condition. "Your Honor is excellent," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "And I believe I am more than capable of speaking for myself." The judge hesitated. He looked at Tiffany, who looked suddenly nervous. He couldn't deny me the right to speak without looking biased. "Proceed, Mr. Caldwell," he said curtly, "but keep it brief." I turned to the gallery. I didn't look at Sarah Jenkins yet. I looked at the room. "I am 75 years old," I began. "I built the Verrazzano Narrows extension. I calculated the load-bearing capacity of the suspension cables to withstand a Category 4 hurricane. The tensile strength of the steel used was 150,000 pounds per square inch. The project came in $3 million under budget and 2 months ahead of schedule." I paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. "Tiffany was born on September 15, 1982 at 3:42 a.m. It was a Tuesday. It was raining. My bank balance as of 8:00 a.m. this morning was exactly $24,512,342.16. I verified it before I came here." I turned to Sarah Jenkins. She was shifting in her seat, her eyes darting around the room. "I do not forget dates, Ms. Jenkins. I do not forget numbers. And I certainly do not forget people. You testified that you left my employment because you were afraid for your safety," I said, taking a step toward the witness stand. "Yes," she stammered. "That is correct." I reached into my inner jacket pocket. James handed me a manila folder. I opened it slowly. "That is interesting," I said. "Because according to this termination report, dated October 14th, 2 years ago, you were fired for cause." "Objection," Cohen shouted, standing up. "Overruled," I said, cutting off the judge before he could speak. "I am introducing evidence, Your Honor. This is a disciplinary record from the State Nursing Board." I walked up to Sarah and placed the document on the railing in front of her. "Do you recognize this, Ms. Jenkins?" I asked. She looked down. Her face went pale. "It is a report filed by the agency that sent you to us." I continued, my voice relentless. "It details an incident where 3 bottles of OxyContin prescribed to my dying wife went missing. It details how I found them in your purse. It details how you begged me not to call the police because you would lose your license." I leaned in close. "I showed you mercy that day, Sarah. I fired you, but I didn't press charges because my wife was in pain and I didn't want the police in her deathbed room. And this is how you repay that mercy, by sitting here and lying about the man who saved your career." The courtroom erupted. Whispers turned into gasps. Tiffany looked like she had been slapped. Judge Thorne banged his gavel, but the sound was weak, drowned out by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. "Ms. Jenkins," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "you are under oath. Perjury is a felony. I am going to ask you one more time. Did you leave because I was confused, or did you leave because you were a thief?" Sarah looked at Tiffany, pleading for help with her eyes. But Tiffany was staring at the table, distancing herself from the sinking ship. Sarah looked at the judge, who was glaring at her, realizing she had become a liability. I... She stuttered, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time. I didn't steal them, I just borrowed them. I had a back problem. It was an admission. It was over. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the witness has just admitted to theft and implied drug abuse during her employment. Her testimony regarding my mental state is not only perjured, it is irrelevant. I walked back to my table and sat down. I straightened my tie. I looked at Tiffany. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at me with pure, unadulterated fear. She realized then that she hadn't brought a confused old man to court. She had brought a shark, and she had just stepped into his tank. But I wasn't done. The nurse was just the opening act. I looked at James Sterling and nodded. It was time for the main event. It was time to play the tapes. James did not give the room time to recover from the nurse's confession. He signaled to the court clerk to cue the next file on the monitor. Your Honor, James said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. The petitioner claims my client is incapable of managing his finances. We would like to submit into evidence a video recording from the Queens branch of a notary service dated 6 months ago. The screen flickered to life. It showed the interior of a small, nondescript office. The timestamp in the corner marked the date and time precisely. The door opened, and Brad walked in. He looked confident, arrogant, the way he always looked when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Following him was an elderly man who was definitely not me. He was stooped over a cane, wearing a hat pulled low and a surgical mask that obscured most of his face. He was a caricature of old age, a prop hired for a few $100s. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Brad guided the imposter to a desk. They watched as the notary presented a stack of loan documents. They watched as the man forged my signature, Harrison Caldwell, over and over again on the mortgage papers for the Hamptons estate. And then the most damning moment of all played out in high definition. Once the notary turned her back to make a copy, Brad high-fived the imposter. It was a gesture of celebration of successful theft. I looked at Brad. He was gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the exit sign. That is a forgery, James stated simply. That is wire fraud. That is identity theft. And that is how the petitioner's husband secured a $4 million loan against a property he does not fully own. Tiffany's face had gone from pale to a ghostly translucent white. She stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. She knew about the money troubles, she knew about the need for cash, but seeing the brazen criminality of it, the crude impersonation of her own father, seemed to break something in her. Or perhaps she was just realizing that her getaway driver had driven them straight off a cliff. But we are not done, James continued. He tapped his tablet. The video vanished, replaced by a black screen with a soundwave visualizer. We also submit into evidence an audio recording taken 3 days ago from the personal vehicle of Mr. Brad Barnes. Objection! Cohen shouted, desperate to stop the bleeding. This is illegal surveillance. It is inadmissible. It was obtained via a cybersecurity audit authorized by the account holder of the device. James countered smoothly, lying only slightly about the phishing link. It goes to the character and intent of the interested parties. Play it, I said from my seat. Judge Thorne looked like he wanted to vanish. He knew whatever was on that tape was going to be bam, and he had taken $50,000 to protect these people. But with the nurse's perjury and the video of the forgery, he had lost control of his courtroom. Overruled, the judge mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. The audio began. The hum of the engine filled the silent courtroom. Then Brad's voice, clear and panicked. The nursing home idea is dead. We need something more permanent. Something that looks like an accident. A gasp went through the gallery. The court reporter stopped typing for a split second, her eyes widening. I watched the jury box, though there was no jury, only the spectators. They were horrified. If he were to run off the road, or if his brakes failed. Brad stood up abruptly, his chair clattering backward. "Turn it off," he screamed. "That's out of context. That's fake." The recording continued relentless. "It solves everything, Tiff. The estate goes into probate. You are the sole heir, and the life insurance. Double indemnity." Then came my daughter's voice, the voice that had once asked me to check under her bed for monsters. "Just don't tell me the details. Just make sure it happens before Friday." The silence that followed the end of the recording was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb. Brad looked around wildly. He saw the bailiffs moving toward him. He saw the doors. He made a move, a sudden lunge toward the aisle, thinking perhaps he could sprint to freedom. "Sit down," the bailiff barked, stepping into his path with his hand on his taser. Brad froze. He looked at Tiffany, but she was staring at the table, shaking her head, distancing herself from him physically and spiritually. Judge Thorne slammed his gavel, trying to regain some semblance of authority. This is highly irregular. I will need to review the admissibility of this evidence in chambers before I can make a ruling." He was trying to buy time. He was trying to find a way to dismiss the case without exposing himself. If he could throw out the recording, maybe he could salvage the guardianship, or at least let them walk away. "I object to this evidence," the judge stammered. "It is clearly prejudicial and—" The double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The sound was like a gunshot. 3 men and a woman in dark windbreakers walked in. They moved with a purpose that terrified everyone in the room. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, were the letters FBI. Leading them was a special agent I had met briefly the night before. He didn't look at me. He walked straight down the center aisle, past the rows of stunned spectators, past Tiffany, past James. "Judge Thorne," the agent said, his voice booming. "I am Special Agent Miller. This court is now a crime scene." Thorne turned a shade of gray I didn't know existed. Agent Miller turned to the defense table. "Brad Barnes, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder across state lines." Brad didn't fight. He collapsed. His legs simply gave out, and he slumped into his chair, weeping. The agents hauled him up, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping the handcuffs on. The metallic click echoed in the room. Tiffany stood up, trembling. "I didn't do anything. It was him, he did it all. I just listened." Agent Miller looked at her coldly. "You are being detained as a material witness and a co-conspirator. You will come with us." Then the agent turned to the bench. "And, Your Honor, we have a warrant for your financial records regarding an offshore transfer of $50,000 received yesterday morning. We suggest you step down from the bench immediately." Judge Thorne looked at the agents, then at the gallery, then at me. He saw his career, his reputation, and his freedom incinerating in real time. He made a split-second decision to save whatever scraps he could. I see," Thorne stammered. "In light of these developments, and the overwhelming evidence presented by the defense, the petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice. Mr. Caldwell is clearly competent. Case dismissed." He banged the gavel one last time, a hollow sound that signaled the end of his career. The agents were dragging Brad toward the door. Tiffany was being escorted out, not in cuffs yet, but clearly in custody. "Wait," I said. My voice stopped the procession. The agents paused. Tiffany looked back at me, her eyes filled with tears and a desperate, pathetic hope. She thought I was going to save her. She thought Daddy was going to write a check to the FBI. I stood up and picked up the leather folder James had prepared. "I have one thing to add to the record," I said, addressing the court reporter and the room at large. "Since my competency has been established and the petition dismissed, I am executing a new will and testament effective immediately." I pulled the document out and held it up. This document contains a no-contest clause, also known as an in terrorem clause. It states that because Tiffany Caldwell Barnes has attacked my estate and attempted to have me declared incompetent without cause, She is immediately and irrevocably disinherited. Tiffany let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She receives nothing. I continued, my voice unwavering. Not the house, not the trust, not a single dollar of my $24 million estate. Everything has been transferred to a trust for the benefit of my niece, Maya Caldwell, and various charitable organizations. Tiffany broke free from the agent's light grip and ran toward the railing. She didn't look sad. She looked rabid. "You can't do that," she screamed, her face twisted and ugly. "That is my money. I am your daughter. You owe me. That is my money." I looked at her, Hilly. Looked at her for the last time. I saw the greed that had consumed her. I saw the stranger she had become. I walked up to the railing until I was face to face with her. "It was never your money, Tiffany," I said, my voice low and cold as ice. "It was my money. I earned it. I built it. And you just lost the privilege of ever touching a cent of it." The agents grabbed her arms and pulled her back. She was screaming as they dragged her out of the courtroom, screaming about what she was owed, screaming about fairness. Brad was weeping silently as he was led out behind her. I stood alone in the center of the room. James Sterling put a hand on my shoulder. "It is done, Harrison," he said softly. "It is over." I looked at the empty door where my family had just been taken away. I felt a profound exhaustion settle into my bones, but beneath it there was a clean, solid foundation. The rot was gone. The structure would hold. I turned to James. "Let's go get a drink," I said. "I believe I have a bridge to inspect." The sound of Brad's handcuffs ratcheting tight was the only thing audible over his pathetic sobbing. As the federal agents hoisted him to his feet, the man who had strutted through my home like he owned it, who had driven my cars and drunk my scotch, completely disintegrated. He didn't look at me. He looked at his wife. He looked at Tiffany with a mixture of terror and sudden vicious hatred. "It wasn't my idea," he screamed, his voice cracking as he struggled against the agent's grip. "She made me do it. She told me to fix the money problem. She told me you were too old to notice." Tiffany froze, her eyes widening as her husband threw her to the wolves to save his own skin. Brad continued to shout as they dragged him toward the double doors, babbling about how he was just trying to keep up with her demands, how she needed the house, the clothes, the status. It was a disgusting display of cowardice, but it was also the final confirmation of everything I had suspected. There was no loyalty among thieves, even when they were married. Tiffany was not handcuffed immediately, but she was flanked by 2 agents who informed her she was being detained for questioning regarding her role in the wire fraud conspiracy. She looked at me one last time before they led her away. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked shattered. She had built her entire identity on perception, on being the successful, beautiful daughter of a wealthy family. In the span of an hour, that identity had been legally and publicly executed. The days that followed were a blur of headlines and legal motions. The story was too perfect for the tabloids to resist. The prominent engineer, the greedy daughter, the desperate son-in-law, the attempted murder plot. My face was on the news, but so was theirs. For Tiffany, the social fallout was more lethal than any prison sentence. The New York Real Estate Board convened an emergency hearing and revoked her license permanently, citing moral turpitude and fraud. Her face, once plastered on bus stops and luxury listing websites, became a symbol of avarice. Her friends, the social climbers she had desperately tried to impress, vanished like smoke. She was radioactive. She was held in custody for 3 days before a judge granted her bail set at an amount that required her to liquidate her jewelry and empty her personal savings account just to secure a bond. She walked out of the detention center with an ankle monitor and nowhere to go. Her home in the Hamptons was a crime scene. Her apartment in the city was being seized by creditors. She was homeless, jobless, and famous in the worst possible way. 1 month later, I received a message through her public defender. She wanted to see me. She was staying in a cheap extended stay motel in Queens, the only place that would take her with her credit rating destroyed and her face on the news. I debated not going. Part of me wanted to let her sit in the mess she had created. But there was a final piece of business to attend to, a final lesson that had to be delivered in person. I drove to the motel on a rainy Tuesday. The place smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. I found room 104 and knocked. When Tiffany opened the door, I barely recognized her. The blonde highlights had grown out, revealing dark roots. Her skin was pale and blotchy. She was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. The arrogant woman who had tried to rob my safe was gone, replaced by a ghost. She stepped back to let me in. The room was small, cluttered with legal paperwork and fast food wrappers. She sat on the edge of the sagging bed, wringing her hands. "Dad," she said, her voice raspy. "Thank you for coming." I didn't sit. I stood by the door, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Tiffany?" "I need help," she whispered. "The lawyer. The public defender. He says I am looking at 3 to 5 years for conspiracy and fraud. He says Brad is testifying against me to cut a deal. He says I need a real criminal defense attorney, someone who knows how to fight federal charges." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I need money, Dad. A retainer for a good firm is $50,000. I don't have it. If you help me, I can fight this. I can stay out of prison." I looked at her truly. Looked at her, even now, at rock bottom, her first instinct was to ask for a check. She still believed that money was the solution to every problem, that my role in her life was simply to provide it. "I am not giving you $50,000, Tiffany," I said. "Please," she begged, standing up and reaching for me. "I am your daughter. You can't let me go to prison. I will pay you back. I swear." "You will never be able to pay me back," I said, my voice flat. "Not for the money, and certainly not for the betrayal." I reached into my jacket pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. I handed it to her. She unfolded it, her hands trembling. She scanned the list, confusion spreading across her face. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a list of job openings," I said. "I spent the morning compiling it. There is a diner 3 blocks from here looking for a dishwasher. The grocery store on the corner needs stock clerks for the night shift. There is a cleaning service hiring maids for minimum wage." She stared at the paper as if it were written in an alien language. You want me to be a maid?" "I want you to work, Tiffany," I said. "For the first time in your life, I want you to trade your labor for money. I want you to understand what a dollar actually costs." "Dad." "I can't do this," she cried, dropping the paper on the bed. "I am a real estate agent. I have a degree." "You are a felon in waiting with a revoked license and a ruined reputation," I corrected her. "You are not too good for these jobs. In fact, right now you are barely qualified for them." She sat back down, burying her face in her hands. "Why are you doing this?" "Why do you hate me? I don't hate you," I said. "If I hated you, I wouldn't be here. I am doing this because it is the only way you survive. You have spent 42 years thinking you were entitled to the world. You thought you could steal what you didn't earn. The only way you salvage a single shred of human dignity is by standing on your own 2 feet, scrubbing floors if you have to, and realizing that you are not special." I walked to the door. "Start with the diner," I suggested. "They pay in cash tips. It will help you buy groceries." I walked out into the rain, leaving her staring at the list. I didn't know if she would take the advice. I didn't know if she was capable of humility. But I had given her the only tool that could actually save her. I had given her reality. The final act of dismantling their conspiracy took place a week later. The legal holds on the Hamptons estate were cleared. Shadow Creek Capital, facing scrutiny from the FBI for their predatory lending practices and lack of due diligence regarding the forged signatures, agreed to a settlement. They released the lien on the property to avoid a federal investigation into their operations. The house was mine to sell. I didn't put it on the open market. I didn't want to drag out the process with stagings and open houses. I called a liquidator and sold it to a developer for a cash offer. It was under market value, but I didn't care about the profit margin. I cared about the excision. After the legitimate mortgage was paid off and the closing costs were settled, there was a surplus of $1.2 million. It was a significant sum money that Tiffany had killed her relationship with me to access. I stood in the foyer of the empty house one last time. The furniture was gone. The echoes of their lavish, unearned lifestyle had faded. It was just wood and plaster now. It wasn't a dream home. It was just a building. I looked out the window at the manicured lawn, where they had planned to host parties for people who didn't care about them. I thought about the bridge I had built in Chicago, how every beam had a purpose, how every rivet was essential. This house had no purpose. It was a monument to vanity. I took the check from my pocket. It was made out to the Catherine Caldwell Engineering Scholarship Fund. Every cent of the proceeds would go to help young women who wanted to build things, who wanted to create value rather than extract it. Catherine would have loved that. It was the only way to purify the money, to wash the stain of fraud from the asset. I walked out the front door and locked it. I dropped the keys into the lockbox for the developer. I didn't look back as I walked to my car. I waited for the wave of sadness to hit me, the grief for the family I had lost. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a lightness in my chest. I felt the clean, cold air of the ocean filling my lungs. I was 75 years old. I was alone. But I was free. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable, and I had not just survived it. I had engineered a solution. I started the engine of my Jaguar. The hum of the motor was steady and strong. I put the car in gear and drove away from the Hamptons, heading back toward the city, toward my work, toward a life that was finally completely honest. 2 days after the sale of the Hamptons house was finalized, I boarded a plane to Boston. I didn't take a private jet. I flew commercial economy class. It was a small personal test to see if I could exist in the world without the armor of luxury I had worn for so long. I found that I didn't mind the cramped legroom. It felt real. It felt like the world I had come from before I built my fortune. I went straight to a small, cluttered coffee shop near the MIT campus. It was raining, a cold New England drizzle that soaked into the bones. I sat in a booth in the back and waited. 10 minutes later, the bell above the door chimed, and a young woman walked in. She was wearing a heavy coat that had seen better days and carrying a backpack that looked heavy enough to contain concrete samples. It was Maya, my son's daughter. The granddaughter I had let slip away into the periphery of my life while I was too busy managing Tiffany's crises. She didn't see me at first. She went behind the counter, tied on an apron, and started her shift. She was 25 years old, a graduate student in structural engineering, working as a barista to pay her rent. She looked tired. Her eyes had dark circles underneath them, but her hands moved with efficient, practiced grace as she made cappuccinos and wiped down tables. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't asking for a bailout. She was working. I waited until there was a lull in the line before I approached the counter. I ordered a black coffee. When she looked up to take the money, she froze. Her eyes, which were the same shape as my late wife's, widened in surprise. "Grandpa Harrison," she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hello, Maya," I said. "I hope I am not interrupting your shift." "No, not at all," she stammered. I didn't know you were coming. Is everything okay? Is Tiffany okay?" I looked at her. Her first instinct was to ask about the family, to ask if we were all right, despite the fact that we had ignored her for years. "Tiffany is finding her own way," I said carefully. "I came to see you." She took her break early. We sat at a small table by the window. I didn't offer her a check. I didn't hand her a suitcase of cash. I knew that would be an insult to the work she was doing. Instead, I placed a thick binder on the table between us. "What is this?" she asked. "I established a foundation in your grandmother's name," I explained. "The Catherine Caldwell Engineering Scholarship Fund. It is fully endowed with the proceeds from a property sale and a significant portion of my estate. It is designed to help young women who want to build things, but don't have the means to do so." Maya touched the binder cover gently. "That sounds amazing, Grandpa. Grandma would have loved that." "But why are you showing me? Because I am too old to run it," I said. "And I don't trust anyone else to understand the vision. I need a trustee. I need someone to review the applications, to manage the grants, to ensure the money goes to builders, not talkers." I opened the binder to the page outlining the trustee's compensation. It was a fair salary enough to allow her to quit the coffee shop and focus on her studies and the foundation, but not enough to buy Ferraris. It was a job, not a lottery win. "I am offering you a job, Maya," I said. "It will be hard work. You will have to make difficult decisions. You will have to say no to people. But you will be building something that lasts." She read the document. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," I said. "Say you will help me honor your grandmother." She nodded, reaching across the table to take my hand. Her grip was strong. It was the grip of an engineer. "Yes," she said. "I will do it." I left Boston that evening feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. I hadn't just given away money. I had invested it. I had placed my legacy in hands that knew the value of labor. A year passed. I turned 76. My life in New York City settled into a new rhythm, one that was quieter, but infinitely more satisfying. I didn't spend my days worrying about stock markets or responding to emergency texts from family members needing bail money. I went back to work, but not for profit. I volunteered as a senior consultant for Habitat for Humanity and other urban renewal nonprofits. I spent my mornings on construction sites in the Bronx and Queens, wearing a hard hat and reviewing blueprints with project managers who were young enough to be my grandchildren. They didn't care about my bank account. They cared that I knew how to calculate load distribution on a retrofitted beam. They respected me for what I knew, not what I owned. In the afternoons, I walked to Washington Square Park. I joined the chess club that gathered near the stone tables. My opponents were retired teachers, taxi drivers, and street hustlers. We played for pride sometimes for a few dollars. There was a man named Saul, a former history professor, who beat me 3 times out of 5. We talked about politics, about history, about the architecture of the city. He didn't know I was a millionaire. To him, I was just Harrison, the guy who played a solid Sicilian defense but was weak against knights. It was a simple life. It was an honest life. It was the life I should have been living all along. One rainy afternoon in November, the mail arrived. Among the utility bills and the architectural journals, there were 2 envelopes that stood out. One was a plain white envelope with a prison stamp on the corner. The other was a cheap, store-bought postcard with a picture of a generic sunset. I sat in my library, the same room where I had once decided to destroy my family, to save myself, and I opened them. The letter was from Brad. He was 2 years into his 12-year sentence. The handwriting was jagged, angry. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He blamed me. He wrote about how unfair the judge was, how the system was rigged, how I had set him up. He wrote that he spent every day thinking about how I had ruined his life. He claimed he was a victim of my ego. I put the letter down. He hadn't changed. Prison hadn't humbled him. It had only calcified his narcissism. He would spend the next decade rotting in his own resentment, never understanding that he held the key to his own cell in the form of accountability. I picked up the postcard. It was from Tiffany. She was living in a small town in Ohio now, working as a cashier at a discount grocery store. She wrote that her feet hurt. She wrote that the customers were rude. She wrote that she missed her old life. I hope you are happy, Dad, she scrawled at the bottom. I hope your money keeps you warm at night because you have nothing else. You chose your wallet over your daughter. I will never forgive you. I looked at the words. They were meant to hurt. They were meant to dig into the old wounds of guilt and regret. But as I read them, I realized the skin had healed over. The words just slid off. She was working. She was standing on her feet. She was earning a wage. She hated it, she hated me, but she was surviving. And in a strange, twisted way, that was the greatest gift I could have given her. I had forced her to become real. Whether she forgave me or not was irrelevant. I had saved her from a life of parasitic delusion. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. The embers were glowing red. I didn't keep the letters. I didn't file them away as evidence. I tossed Brad's rant and Tiffany's bitter postcard onto the coals. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched the ink vanish in a burst of yellow flame. I watched the last physical tethers to my toxic past turn into ash and float up the chimney, disappearing into the cold city air. I turned away from the fire. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the mantel. I saw a man who had aged, yes. The lines were deeper. The hair was whiter. But the eyes were clear. The slump in the shoulders was gone. People say that blood is thicker than water. They say that family is everything. But I have learned that is a dangerous lie. Blood can be poisoned. Family can be the anchor that drowns you. I had lost a family, yes. I had lost the illusion of the perfect daughter and the successful son-in-law. But I had found something far more valuable. I had found myself. I had found the Harrison Caldwell who built bridges. I had found the man who valued truth over comfort. I had found that solitude in honor is infinitely better than company in lies. I wasn't lonely. I was free. I checked my watch. It was 6:00 p.m. I had a reservation at a small Italian restaurant in the village. I adjusted my tie, a silk one with a subtle pattern, and smoothed my jacket. I wasn't eating alone tonight. I was meeting Elena. She was a retired architect I had met at the housing project in the Bronx. She was 72 with silver hair cut short and a laugh that sounded like jazz music. She challenged my ideas on urban planning. She drank her coffee black. She didn't need my money. She had her own pension and her own life. She liked me because I made her laugh and because I listened when she spoke. I walked out of the brownstone and locked the door behind me. The air was crisp, smelling of rain and autumn leaves. I walked down the steps and onto the sidewalk, my stride long and purposeful. I didn't look back at the empty house. I looked forward down the street toward the subway station, toward the restaurant, toward the future. My lawyer had told me to call him immediately. He had told me the terrible truth about my daughter. It had been the worst day of my life. But as I merged into the stream of New Yorkers, just another face in the crowd, I realized that terrible truth had set me free. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. And now, at 76 years old, I was finally ready to build something new. 3 years later, the invitations for the inaugural gala of the Catherine Caldwell Engineering Scholarship Fund were printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock with embossed navy lettering. I held one in my hands, sitting in the office of the Foundation's headquarters, a renovated loft space in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The space smelled of sawdust and coffee, the scent of construction, the scent of progress. I was 79 years old. My hair was completely white now, and I used a cane on damp days not out of necessity, but as a precaution for a knee that had climbed too many scaffolding ladders in its time. Across the room, Maya was on the phone directing a contractor about the lighting installation for the event. She had graduated with honors, earned her master's, and was now running the foundation with a terrifying efficiency that reminded me so much of myself at her age, minus the ego. We had given away $3 million in grants over the last 36 months. We had put 12 young women through engineering programs. We had funded the rehabilitation of a community center in the Bronx and a sustainable water project in upstate New York. The money that Tiffany and Brad had tried to steal to buy sports cars and status was now building literal bridges. "Grandpa," Maya said, hanging up the phone and turning to me, "the guest list is finalized. The mayor is coming. The dean of MIT is coming. It's going to be a full house." "Good," I said, placing the invitation on her desk. "You did this, Maya. All of it." "We did it," she corrected me, smiling. "But there is one name on the wait list I need to ask you about." She hesitated, her expression tightening. "A woman called the RSVP line 3 times yesterday. She didn't leave a name, but the caller ID was from a prepaid burner phone. She asked if the event was open to the public. She asked if Harrison Caldwell would be there." I felt a familiar coldness settle in my chest. It had been 3 years of silence, 3 years of peace. But I knew that voice. I knew that desperation. "It's her, isn't it?" Maya asked softly. "Probably," I admitted. "Brad is still in prison. His first parole hearing isn't for another 18 months. Tiffany is alone. She is likely realizing that the 3-year mark is approaching." "What happens at the 3-year mark?" "Nothing legal," I said. "But psychologically, it's a breaking point. It's the moment you realize that the temporary punishment is actually a permanent reality. She probably thinks enough time has passed. She thinks the no contest clause has an expiration date on my anger." "Do we need extra security?" Maya asked, her pragmatic engineer's brain taking over. "We always have security," I said. "But yes, give the team a heads up. If she shows up, she doesn't get past the door. I don't want a scene. This night is about Catherine, not Tiffany." The night of the gala was crisp and clear. The Brooklyn skyline glittered across the East River. The venue was filled with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the energy of people who were there to build, not destroy. I wore my tuxedo, the same one I had worn 30 years ago, which fit better now than it had then. Elena was by my side, looking stunning in a silver gown, her sharp wit charming a senator from New Jersey. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests, feeling a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced during my years of chasing profit. This was legacy. This was real. Then I saw the commotion near the velvet ropes outside. The security team, 2 large men in dark suits, had stepped in front of a woman. She wasn't wearing a gown. She was wearing a trench coat that was too thin for the weather, buttoned up to her chin. Her hair was pulled back severely. She was arguing, gesturing frantically toward the glass doors where I stood. I excused myself from the senator and walked toward the entrance. Maya saw me and started to follow, but I signaled for her to stay back. This was my demolition site to clear. I pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the cool night air. The noise of the city rushed in. "I am his daughter," the woman was screaming. "You can't keep me out. I just want to wish him congratulations. I have rights." "Tiffany," I said. She froze. She turned to look at me. The years had not been kind. The stress of poverty, of standing on her feet all day, of living in a world that didn't care about her last name, was etched into the lines around her mouth and eyes. She looked older than 45. She looked worn. "Dad?" She breathed, her voice cracking. She took a step forward, but the security guard put out a hand to stop her. "Let her speak some," I told the guard. "But don't let her pass the rope." Tiffany looked at me, her eyes darting over my tuxedo, the warmth of the party behind me, the life she had been exiled from. "I saw the article in the Times," she said, clutching a crumpled newspaper clipping in her hand. "About the foundation, about the millions you're giving away." "It is a good cause," I said neutrally. "I'm working at a diner in Jersey City," she blurted out, as if expecting a medal. "I'm a shift manager now. I make $15 an hour plus tips. I have a studio apartment. I pay my own rent." "I know," I said. "I have kept tabs. You check on me. Hope flared in her eyes, dangerous and sharp. I verify, I corrected. I verify that you are safe. That is all. I did what you said, she pleaded, gripping the velvet rope. I got a job. I learned the value of $1. I suffered, Dad. God, have I suffered? Isn't that enough? Haven't I paid the price? Can't I come home now? I looked at her. I saw the pain. I saw the genuine struggle. She had survived. She had done what I told her to do, but as I looked closer, I saw the reason she was here tonight. It wasn't because she missed me. It wasn't because she wanted to celebrate her mother's memory. Why are you here, Tiffany? I asked quietly. I have debts, she whispered, the facade crumbling instantly. Brad left me with legal fees. The IRS came after me for the back taxes on the unreported income from the laundering scheme. They are garnishing my wages. I can't live like this, Dad. I'm drowning. I see you giving away millions to strangers, to Maya, and I'm your daughter. Just a little help. Just a loan. Please. The sadness I felt was profound, but it wasn't surprising. She hadn't changed. She had adapted to survive, but the core operating system was the same. She still believed that my money was the answer to her problems. She still believed she was owed. You are working, I said. You are paying your rent. You are surviving. That is more than you were doing 3 years ago. But I'm poor, she hissed, her anger resurfacing. I'm a nobody. Do you know how humiliating it is to serve coffee to people I used to go to parties with? It is honest work, I said. There is no shame in it unless you bring the shame yourself. I am suing, she spat out, desperation turning to threats. I spoke to a lawyer. He says the no contest clause might be challengeable if I can prove undue influence from Maya. He says I can tie this foundation up in court for years. I sighed. It was the threat I had been waiting for, the final test. Tiffany, I said, stepping closer to the rope so only she could hear me. If you sue, you will lose. The documentation of your fraud, your conspiracy with Brad, the audio recordings of you sanctioning my murder, they are all part of the permanent record of the trust. If you file a lawsuit, those records become public evidence in the civil trial. Right now, your criminal record is sealed as part of your plea deal. If you attack the will, everything opens up. The world will know you didn't just steal. You agreed to kill. Her face went white. She hadn't thought of that. She had forgotten that I held the ultimate trump card. Furthermore, I continued, the no contest clause is ironclad. But more importantly, I have instructed the Foundation's legal team to countersue for the legal fees. You will not only lose, you will be bankrupt for the rest of your life. You have a job now. You have a life. It is small, but it is yours. Do not throw it away on a gamble you cannot win. She stared at me, trembling. She realized finally and completely that the door was not just locked. It was bricked over. You really don't love me, she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. I loved you enough to stop you from becoming a monster, I said. And I love you enough to tell you the truth now. Go home, Tiffany. Go back to your life. It is the only one you have. She stood there for a long moment, shivering in the cold. Then slowly she turned around. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply buttoned her coat tighter, lowered her head against the wind, and walked away into the darkness of the parking lot. I watched her go until she was just a shadow. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, sending my child away into the cold. But I knew that if I opened that rope, if I wrote that check, I would be destroying her all over again. I would be resetting the clock on her addiction to entitlement. I turned back to the gala. Maya was waiting for me by the door, concern etched on her face. Is she gone? Maya asked. Yes, I said. She is gone. Are you okay? I straightened my cufflinks. I looked at the room full of people who were celebrating. Catherine celebrating the future, celebrating the act of building. I am fine, I said. In fact, I have never been better. I took Maya's arm. Come on. The mayor is waiting, and I want to introduce you to the head of the Port Authority. He has a project in Queens that needs a structural engineer with a vision. We walked back into the light. The music swelled. The laughter rose. I was Harrison Caldwell. I was 79 years old. I had built bridges of steel and concrete, and I had burned bridges of toxicity and greed. And as I looked at my granddaughter, the true heir to my spirit, I knew that the foundation I had laid would stand long after I was gone. The inspection was complete. The structure was sound. The legacy was safe. Looking back on everything that happened, I don't tell this family story with pride. I tell it with honesty. I was a father who believed that love meant giving without limits. I thought protecting my child meant fixing every mistake for her. I was wrong. Don't be like me. Don't confuse love with surrender, and don't mistake silence for peace. This family story taught me that boundaries are not cruelty, they are responsibility. If there is one lesson I can pass on, it's this: never ignore the quiet warnings in your heart. I ignored mine for years. I trusted blindly. I excused behavior I should have confronted, and when the truth finally came, it nearly destroyed me. But God gave me clarity when I had nothing left. God reminded me that dignity matters more than comfort. And God showed me that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, exactly when you are ready to stand. This wasn't just dad revenge. It wasn't anger or hatred. This dad revenge was about choosing truth over blood and integrity over fear. Real justice isn't about punishment. It's about ending the cycle so it doesn't poison the next generation. That's the real ending of this family story. If you take anything from this, let it be this advice: protect your name, protect your mind, and protect your soul. Even when it means standing alone, even when it means walking away from the people you love most. Because without boundaries, love turns into destruction. That is the hardest lesson this dad revenge ever taught me. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to leave a comment and share where you're watching from. If you know someone who might need to hear this, please share it with them. And if you believe stories like this matter, consider subscribing to the channel. It truly helps more than you know. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. And before you go, a gentle note: upcoming stories may include dramatized elements created for educational and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to choose another video that better fits your interests.